The fortress city of New Geneva burned against the alien sky. Commander Sarah. Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's cracked window, watching orange flames lick at buildings that had stood for 300 years.
Ow.
Below the Zephyrian, war machines moved like metallic spiders through the streets, their energy weapons turning everything they touched into glowing slag. "Ma'am, we're down to 47 functional defense turrets," reported Lieutenant Marcus Webb, his voice tight. With barely controlled panic, blood from a head wound had dried across his dark skin, making him look older than his 25 years. 8. The eastern wall is completely gone. They'll breach the inner perimeter within the hour. Sarah didn't turn from the window. She couldn't bear to see the fear in her people's eyes again. How many civilians made it to the evacuation ships? 2,000, maybe less. The Zephyrians hit the spaceport hard. Most of the transports. Marcus's voice trailed off. Most of the transports were now twisted metal and ash. Sarah knew that without him saying it. She'd watched them burn from this very window, each explosion taking hundreds of innocent lives with it. Admiral Reyes is requesting immediate tactical retreat to the inner colonies. Marcus continued, reading from his datapad. He says we can't hold this position. Sarah finally turned around. The command center buzzed with desperate activity. As her remaining staff tried to coordinate a defense against impossible odds, holographic displays showed red markers advancing from every direction. The blue dots representing human forces grew fewer by the minute. "Tell the Admiral we hold until every civilian is evacuated," she said firmly, not one step back. "Dr. Alina." Vasquez looked up from her scanner array, her usually perfect hair now a mess of gray strands. The chief scientist had worked without sleep for 3 days straight, trying to find some weakness in the Zephyrian technology. "Sarah, the quantum signatures I'm reading. Their fleet is massive. 3,000 ships, maybe more. We have 6 operational vessels left in the entire sector." The numbers hit like a physical blow. 3,000 against 67? It wasn't a battle anymore. It was an execution. A young communications officer, barely out of academy training, stumbled over to Sarah's position. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors. Multiple jump signatures at the edge of the system. But they're not Zephyrian." Sarah felt her heart skip. "What kind of signatures?" I don't know, ma'am. They're massive. Bigger than anything in our databases. We're hard and there are hundreds of them." The command center fell silent except for the distant rumble of explosions. Everyone turned to look at the main display as the sensor officer brought up the readings. What they saw made no sense. Massive energy signatures were appearing at the system's edge. Each one the size of a battleship, but with power readings that defied explanation. As they watched, more appeared, then more. The display showed dozens, then hundreds of new contacts materializing from hyperspace. "My God," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her scanner forgotten in her hands. The energy output. "Impossible. Those aren't ships. They're something else entirely." A new voice crackled over the communications array, speaking in clear, unaccented English. "New Geneva Defense Command? This is Admiral Harrison of the Terran Colonial Fleet. We received your distress beacon. Sorry we're late to the party." Sarah stared at the display in shock. The Terran Colonial Fleet had been presumed destroyed when Earth fell 6 months ago. The entire home system had gone dark, cut off by Zephyrian interdiction fields. No one had heard from Earth or the core colonies since the invasion began. "This is Commander Chen," she managed to say into her headset. "Admiral, we thought Earth was lost. We haven't heard anything from the core systems in months." A chuckle came through the static. "Reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated, Commander. We've been busy building something special. Stand by for tactical coordination." Data. The holographic display suddenly exploded with new information. Ship classifications Sarah had never seen before appeared alongside familiar human vessel types. Dreadnoughts, the size of small cities, carrier groups that could house entire fleets, weapons platforms that looked more like space stations than warships. But it was the numbers that made her legs weak. 5,000 ships, 5,000 human vessels, appearing like ghosts from the dark between stars. How? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Admiral Harrison's voice came through, clearly, as if he could hear her thoughts. When the Zephyrians hit Earth, they made one critical mistake. They assumed we'd fight them the same way we'd always fought each other. Small fleets, limited resources, predictable tactics. Da! On the display, the human fleet began to move. In the cautious formations Sarah was used to, but in perfect coordination, like a single, massive organism. They didn't count on humanity doing what we do best, Harrison continued. Adapting, evolving, getting really, really angry. The Zephyrian fleet, still pushing toward New Geneva, suddenly slowed. Their perfect formation began to waver as sensors detected the approaching human armada. All New Geneva forces, this is Admiral Harrison. Pull back to minimum safe distance. We're about to show these metallic bastards why you never back a human into a corner. Sarah looked around her command center. The fear in her people's eyes had been replaced by something else. Hope. Wild, desperate hope, but hope nonetheless. You heard the Admiral, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. All units, withdraw to coordinates 77 Alpha. Let's give our guests some room to work. As the human defense fleet pulled back, Sarah kept her eyes on the tactical display. The Zephyrian Armada was massive, their ships bristling with the weapons that had torn through human space for months. But for the first time since the war began, they weren't advancing. They were waiting, watching, perhaps even afraid. The human fleet continued its approach, and Sarah noticed something that made her smile for the first time in weeks. The ships weren't just moving in formation, they were accelerating, faster and faster, as if eager for the fight ahead. Admiral, she said into her headset, what exactly did you build out there? Another chuckle, something the Zephyrians won't see coming. Commander, something that's about to make them very, very sorry they ever heard of humanity. The two fleets were now close enough that individual ship signatures appeared on the display. Sarah counted Zephyrian vessels by the thousand, their sleek forms cutting through space like silver daggers. But the human ships, ... They were different, larger, more aggressive in their design. And they moved with a confidence that spoke of power beyond anything she'd ever seen. All human vessels, Admiral Harrison's voice echoed across the communication channels. This is for Earth. This is. For every colony they burned. This is for every life they took. The space between the fleets suddenly erupted in light. Hush Hush Chapter 2. Unleash the. First salvo from the human fleet lit up space like a newborn star. Sarah watched from New Geneva's command center as beams of pure energy lanced across the void, each one brighter than her planet's sun. The Zephyrian ships, caught completely off guard, scrambled to raise their shields. Most succeeded. Some didn't. The ones that didn't simply ceased to exist. Jesus, Lieutenant Webb whispered, his face pressed against the observation window.
What
kind of weapons are those? Dr. Vasquez was frantically working her scanner array, trying to make sense of the energy readings. It's not possible, she muttered. These power signatures. They're showing weapons that draw energy directly from stellar cores, but that technology doesn't exist. We never cracked controlled stellar manipulation. On the display, the Zephyrian fleet was reforming, their initial shock wearing off. 3,000 ships began to move in their signature pattern, a spiral formation that concentrated firepower, while maintaining defensive positions. It was the same tactic that had crushed human fleets across 12 star systems. But this time, something was different. The human fleet didn't scatter or try to match the Zephyrian formation. Instead, they did something Sarah had never seen before. They stopped moving entirely. 5,000 ships, hanging motionless in space, like sleeping giants. Admiral Harrison, Sarah called into her headset, "Are you experiencing technical difficulties?" "Your fleet has stopped." "No technical difficulties, Commander," came the calm reply. "We're exactly where we need to be. All units, initiate Protocol 7. Sarah had never heard of Protocol 7. Apparently, neither had anyone else in her command center, judging by the confused looks being exchanged. Then the human ships began to change. It started with the larger, its vessels, massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in Sarah's experience. Sections of their hulls started to unfold, revealing structures that had been hidden beneath armor plating. What Sarah had taken for weapon arrays were actually something far more complex. "They're transforming," Dr. Vasquez said in amazement. "The ships are physically reconfiguring themselves." Within minutes, the human fleet had become something else entirely. The individual vessels had linked together, forming massive geometric structures that stretched across thousands of kilometers. What had been 5,000 separate ships was now a dozen enormous constructs, each one the size of a small moon. "Holy hell," Webb breathed. Admiral Harrison's voice crackled over the com with obvious satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Aegis platform system. 6 months of Earth's greatest minds working around the clock. Every human colony, every research station, every last scrap of industrial capacity focused on one goal." The Zephyrian fleet had stopped their advance entirely. Even from this distance, Sarah could see their formation wavering as they tried to process what they were seeing. "Building something that could end this war in a single engagement," Harrison continued. "Commander Chen, you might want to have your people step away from the windows." Sarah barely had time to shout the warning before space itself seemed to tear open. The Aegis platforms fired simultaneously, and the beams that emerged weren't just energy weapons. They were something that defied everything Sarah knew about physics. The space between the human constructs and the Zephyrian fleet simply ... folded. Reality twisted like a piece of paper being crumpled, and suddenly the alien ships were no longer where they had been. They were inside a geometric prison of pure energy. "Dimensional manipulation," Dr. Vasquez gasped, her scanners going crazy with readings she couldn't interpret.
Ow!
"They've found a way to fold space-time itself."
Ow!
The Zephyrian fleet isn't just trapped, they're existing in a pocket dimension.
Ow!
Alien ships fired desperately at the energy barriers containing them, their weapons creating brilliant flashes of light. But nothing they did had any effect. Their beams simply vanished into the dimensional walls, as if they'd never existed at all. "This is Admiral Karthik of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet." A mechanical voice suddenly crackled over the communications array. It was the first time Sarah had ever heard a Zephyrian speak directly to humans. "We demand immediate release. Weapon violates the galactic accords on dimensional warfare." Admiral Harrison's laughter echoed across the com channels. "Galactic accords? You mean the same accords you ignored when you glassed Earth's moon? When you turned Mars into a crater? When you slaughtered 3 billion civilians on Proxima?" The trapped Zephyrian fleet continued firing, their beams growing more desperate with each passing minute. Some ships tried ramming the dimensional barriers. Others attempted to overload their own reactors in suicide attacks. Nothing worked. "Here's the thing about humanity, Admiral Karthik," Harrison continued, his voice losing all humor. "We're very good at learning from our mistakes. And we're even better at making sure those mistakes don't happen again." Sarah found herself holding her breath. The tactical display showed the Zephyrian fleet completely contained, unable to move or escape, but she could see other signatures on the long-range sensors, more alien fleets moving toward their position. "Admiral, I'm reading reinforcements," she reported. "At least 2 more Zephyrian battle groups approaching from the outer system." "We see them, Commander. In fact, we've been tracking their approach for the last hour. They're right on schedule." "On schedule?" Sarah asked, confused. "Commander, did you really think this was a rescue mission?" Harrison's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. New Geneva was never the target, it was the bait. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You used us as bait? You let the Zephyrians attack, knowing they'd call for reinforcements?" "Sorry, Commander. I truly am. But this was the only way to get all 3 of their major fleets in one location. The only chance to end this war before they could retreat to their home systems and start over." On the display, 2 more massive Zephyrian fleets were entering the system. Each one consisted of thousands of ships, the accumulated might of an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. Sarah felt sick. "Admiral, even with your weapons, you can't possibly contain all of them. There are too many." "You're absolutely right, Commander. We can't contain them all." The second and third Zephyrian fleets were moving fast now, clearly intending to break. the dimensional cage holding their comrades. Their formation was tight, efficient, deadly. But we don't need to contain them, Harrison added. We just need to do something else. The Aegis platforms began to move again, their massive forms shifting and reconfiguring. Sarah realized with growing horror that they weren't just repositioning, they were preparing for something much bigger. All human vessels, all colonies, all listening posts. Admiral Harrison's voice broadcast on every frequency. This is Admiral Harrison with a final message. Humanity has been pushed to the edge of extinction. We've lost worlds, lost billions of our people, lost everything we held dear. The Aegis platforms had formed a perfect sphere around the trapped Zephyrian fleet. Energy was building between them, creating patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. But we haven't lost our will to survive. We haven't lost our determination to protect those we love. And we sure as hell haven't lost our ability to make the bad guys pay for what they've done. The approaching Zephyrian fleets had almost reached weapon range. Thousands of alien ships, all focused on breaking their comrades free from the dimensional prison. For Earth, Admiral Harrison said quietly. For humanity. For everyone we couldn't save. The Aegis platforms fired again, but this time, they weren't targeting the trapped fleet. They were targeting the star. #. Chapter 3. The Sun Killer the Star began to die. Sarah watched in terrified fascination as Sol Delta, the system's primary star, started to dim. Not gradually like a natural stellar death, but rapidly, as if something was drinking its light. What are they doing? Dr. Vasquez's voice was barely a whisper. Her scanners were showing readings that shouldn't exist. The star's core temperature was dropping, its fusion reactions slowing, its magnetic field fluctuating wildly. Admiral. Harrison's voice came through the cum with the calm of a man who had accepted the consequences of his actions. Controlled stellar collapse, Doctor. We're turning the star into a weapon. The two approaching Zephyrian fleets had stopped their advance. Even alien artificial intelligence could recognize the signs of stellar instability. The star went nova. Everything in the system would be incinerated. You're insane, Admiral. Karthik's mechanical voice crackled with something that might have been fear. You'll destroy yourselves along with us. No species would sacrifice an entire star system for tactical advantage. You clearly don't know humans very well, Harrison replied. Commander Chen, I need you to evacuate your people to the outer system. Now, Sarah was already moving, barking orders to her staff. All personnel to emergency shuttles, full evacuation protocols. Move, move, move. But even as her people rushed to escape pods and shuttles, Sarah kept her eyes on the tactical display. The star was continuing to collapse, its light shifting from bright white to angry red. The dimensional cage holding the first Zephyrian fleet was still intact, but the energy patterns were becoming unstable. Admiral, she called as she ran toward the shuttle bay. How long do we have? Stellar collapse will reach critical point in 17 minutes. The dimensional barriers will fail in 12. That's when things get interesting. Interesting. Sarah almost laughed at the understatement as she dove into the last evacuation shuttle. Through the small porthole, she could see the star growing visibly dimmer, its surface writhing with unprecedented solar storms. The shuttle cleared New Geneva's atmosphere, just as the dimensional cage finally collapsed. 3,000 Zephyrion. Ships suddenly found themselves free, but their relief lasted exactly for seconds. That's how long it took them to realize they were sitting next to a star that was about to explode. The alien fleet scattered in every direction, their perfect formations dissolving into desperate flight. But there was nowhere to run. The other two Zephyrian fleets, still positioned at the system's edge, were caught between advancing into the Nova Zone or retreating and abandoning their allies. All Zephyrian vessels, Admiral Harrison broadcast on all frequencies. You have one chance. Unconditional surrender. Power down your weapons, drop your shields, and prepare to be boarded. Never, Admiral Karthik replied. The Empire does. Not surrender to inferior species. Your choice, Harrison said calmly. Dr. Chen, are you familiar with the concept of a stellar resonance cascade? Dr. Vasquez, who had managed to squeeze into Sarah's shuttle along with her portable scanner array, looked up with wide eyes. Theoretical only. It's supposed to be impossible, using a star's gravitational field to amplify energy weapons beyond any conventional limit. It was impossible, Harrison agreed, till we figured out how to make stars do what we wanted them to do. The dying star suddenly pulsed, its dim light flaring back to brilliant white for just a moment. In that instant, the Aegis platforms fired again, but this time, their beams didn't travel through normal space. They moved through the star itself, using its collapsing core as a focusing lens. When the energy emerged, it had been amplified beyond anything Sarah could have imagined. The beams struck all three Zephyrian fleets simultaneously. Sarah had seen ships destroyed before. She'd watched entire battle groups reduced to debris and vapor, but this was different. This was ships, thousands of them, simply ceasing to exist, not exploding, not burning, just vanishing as if they'd never been there at all. In less than 30 seconds, the accumulated might of the Zephyrian Empire, nearly 10,000 warships, the product of centuries of technological advancement, was gone. My God, Sarah whispered. The star, having served its purpose, continued its controlled collapse. But now, the Aegis platforms were moving again, reconfiguring themselves into a new pattern. The energy they'd been feeding to the star reversed direction, and slowly, impossibly, the stellar collapse began to stop. "We can restart stars too," Admiral Harrison said conversationally. "Took us 3 months to figure that part out. Turns out, once you understand how stellar mechanics really work, you can do all sorts of interesting things." Dr. Vasquez was staring at her scanner readings in disbelief. The star is stabilizing. Its core temperature is rising back to normal levels. They're actually restarting nuclear fusion. Within an hour, Sol Delta was burning bright and steady again, as if nothing had happened. The only evidence of the battle was the slowly expanding clouds of exotic particles where 10,000 Zephyrian ships had once been. Sarah's shuttle docked. With one of the human fleet's smaller vessels, though smaller, was relative when talking about ships the size of cities. She was escorted to a briefing room where Admiral Harrison was waiting. He was younger than she'd expected, to be 50, with graying hair and the kind of calm eyes that came from making impossible decisions. He stood when she entered, offering a respectful nod. "Commander Chen, I owe you an apology." Sarah sat down across from him, still trying to process what she'd witnessed. "You used my entire colony as bait. My people died because you needed to lure the Zephyrians into a trap." "Yes," Harrison said simply. 2,000 civilian casualties to end a war that would have cost billions more lives. It was a terrible choice, but it was the only choice. "How?" Sarah asked. "How did you build all this?" "It's the Aegis platforms, the stellar manipulation technology. It's centuries ahead of anything we had before the war." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "When Earth fell, we had 2 options. Fight the same kind of war we'd always fought and lose slowly, or become something the Zephyrians couldn't predict or counter." He activated a holographic display that showed Earth, not the devastated world Sarah had expected, but a planet, surrounded by massive construction rings and industrial platforms. "We turned the entire solar system into a weapons factory. Every asteroid, every moon, every scrap of material was converted into resources. We took every human scientist, every engineer, every brilliant mind we could find, and gave them one job: build something that could win." The display showed the construction process, millions of people working around the clock. Entire planets stripped of resources, space-based factories churning out components for weapons that existed only in theory. "It cost us everything," Harrison continued. "We turned Earth into an industrial wasteland. We sacrificed entire generations to this project. But we built something the Zephyrians never saw coming." Sarah studied the tactical data, beginning to understand the scope of what humanity had accomplished. "The stellar manipulation technology, how many stars can you control?" Harrison smiled grimly. "Every star in human space. Every star in Zephyrian space. Every star within 1,000 light-years of Earth." The implications hit Sarah like a hammer blow. "You can destroy entire solar systems. You can destroy entire sectors of the galaxy if we need to," Harrison confirmed. The question is, do we need to? He activated another display, this one showing deep space communication intercepts. Signals from across the galaxy, all carrying the same message, the Zephyrian Empire's unconditional surrender. Turns out, when you demonstrate the ability to make stars explode on command, other species become very interested in negotiating. Harrison said, "The Zephyrian High Command surrendered 18 hours ago. They're withdrawing from all human colonies and offering full reparations." Sarah stared at the surrender documents, written in a dozen alien languages. "It's over? Just like that?" "Just like that," Harrison confirmed. "The war is over, Commander. Humanity survives. And every species in the galaxy now knows what happens when you threaten human civilians." But Sarah could see something in the Admiral's eyes, a weight that went beyond the relief of victory. "What's the catch?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "The catch is what we became to win this war. The weapons we built, the power we now possess, it changes things. Other species are already forming defensive alliances against us. They see humans as the new existential threat." He stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the Aegis platforms as they continued their reconfiguration process. "We saved humanity," he said quietly. "But we may have doomed the galaxy to fear us forever." Sarah joined him at the viewport. In the distance, she could see New Geneva, damaged but still intact. Her home, the place she'd been willing to die defending. "Maybe fear isn't such a bad thing," she said. "Maybe if they're afraid of us, they'll think twice before trying to wipe us out again." Harrison nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe fear will make them desperate enough to try something even worse." The two officers stood in silence, watching as the first human ships began moving toward New Geneva to begin reconstruction efforts. The war was over, but Sarah realized that the real challenges were just beginning. Humanity had become something new, something powerful, something that could reach across the void and make stars themselves into weapons. The question was, what would they do with that power? Hosh Hosh Chapter 4. New Horizons 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Terran Command Station, watching as the last Zephyrian evacuation convoy disappeared into hyperspace. The aliens had been efficient in their withdrawal. She'd give them that. Every occupied human world had been returned. Every piece of stolen technology surrendered. Every war criminal handed over for trial. The Zephyrian Empire had learned to be very cooperative when facing species that could make their suns go out. Penny. "For your thoughts?" Admiral Harrison joined her at the viewport, carrying 2 cups of coffee that actually tasted like coffee for the first time in years. Sarah accepted the cup gratefully. "Just thinking about how quiet it is now. For 2 years, we lived with the constant threat of alien invasion. Now, silent." Below them, New Geneva sparkled in the restored light of Sol Delta. The reconstruction had gone faster than anyone expected, helped by Zephyrian reparation technology and human determination. The city was bigger now, more advanced, protected by defense systems that could obliterate entire fleets. "It's not really silent," Harrison pointed out. "We're getting diplomatic requests from 17 different species. Trade agreements, defensive pacts, research partnerships. Half the galaxy wants to be humanity's friend now. And the other half is very politely pretending we don't exist," Harrison said with a wry smile, "which is probably the smart play." Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled over the intercom system. "Admiral, Commander, please report to Laboratory 7. We have something you need to see." They found Alina in her new lab, surrounded by equipment that made her old scanner arrays look like children's toys. Most of it was Zephyrian technology, handed over as part of the reparations package. "What have you discovered now?" Sarah asked. Alina had been working non-stop since the war ended, reverse engineering alien technology and integrating it with human innovations. "Something wonderful and terrifying," Alina replied, activating a holographic display. "I've been analyzing the quantum resonance patterns from the Aegis platforms, trying to understand exactly how the stellar manipulation works." The display showed a 3-dimensional map of local space, the stars marked in different colors based on their energy signatures. The technology doesn't just affect individual stars, Alina continued. It creates a quantum field that links stellar cores across vast distances. Essentially, we've turned every star within 1,000 light-years into part of a single massive weapon system. Harrison frowned. We knew that. It was part of the original design parameters. Yes, but here's what we didn't know. Alina highlighted several star systems on the display. The field is expanding, not quickly, but consistently. At current rates, it will encompass the entire galaxy within 5,000 years. Sarah stared at the projection. You're saying we're accidentally converting the entire galaxy into a weapon? Not accidentally, Alina corrected. The field expansion is a fundamental property of the quantum resonance effect. It was always going to happen. The question is what we do about it. Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long time, studying the display. What are our options? 3 possibilities, Alina said, highlighting different sections of the map. First, we can shut down the Aegis platforms entirely. The field will collapse, and we lose our strategic advantage, but the expansion stops. Not an option, Harrison said immediately. Too many species would see that as weakness. We'd be back at war within a decade. Second option, we find a way to control the expansion. Focus it only on star systems that pose a threat to human interests. Practically challenging, but theoretically possible. The third option, Hera asked, though she suspected she already knew. Elena's expression was grim. We accept that humanity has become the galaxy's dominant power. We use our control over stellar mechanics to enforce peace, prevent wars, protect developing civilizations. Essentially, we become the galaxy's police force. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a physical weight. Humanity, as the ultimate authority over hundreds of billions of beings, power to decide which civilizations lived or died based on whether they threaten galactic stability. There's something else, Alina added quietly. The quantum field isn't just connecting stars, it's affecting space-time itself. I'm detecting anomalies that suggest we may have accidentally created pathways to other galaxies. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the laboratory floor. Other galaxies. The Andromeda galaxy is showing quantum resonance signatures identical to our own stellar field. Either they have similar technology, or... Lena paused, checking her readings again. Hello, I asked Admiral Harrison activated his communication device. His priority alert to Earth Command. We need a full scientific review of the Aegis platform effects. And get me a meeting with the Galactic Council representatives. Harrison coordinated the response. Sarah found herself staring at the star map with a mixture of awe and terror. Humanity had set out to save itself from extinction. Instead, they'd accidentally become the most powerful force in galactic history. Alina, she said quietly, what does this mean for us, for humanity's future? Dr. Vasquez looked at her with eyes that held the weight of impossible knowledge. It means we're no longer just fighting for survival, Sarah. We're responsible for the survival of everyone. Every species, every civilization, every living being in the galaxy. She paused, highlighting Earth on the display, a small blue dot among billions of stars. A year ago, we were a minor species facing extinction. Now we're accidentally in charge of maintaining cosmic order. The question is, are we wise enough to handle that responsibility? Through the laboratory's viewport, Sarah could see human ships moving between the stars, no longer as desperate refugees, but as the guardians of an entire galaxy. Each ship carried weapons that could destroy solar systems, technology that could reach across the void to touch other galaxies. In the distance, alien vessels moved carefully through human-controlled space, following flight paths approved by human traffic controllers. Their crews knowing that any aggressive action would bring swift and overwhelming retaliation. Humanity had won the war. But Sarah was beginning to realize that winning might have been the easy part. The hard part would be learning to live with victory. #. Epilogue. The Weight of Stars. 5 years after the end of the Zephyrian War, Sarah Chen, now Director of Galactic Affairs, stood in the observatory of humanity's newest deep space station, positioned at the edge of the galaxy. Through the massive viewport, she could see the swirling lights of Andromeda. No longer just a distant spiral, but a neighbor showing signs of quantum resonance. The Andromeda contact team is reporting successful first contact, Admiral Harrison said as he joined her. His hair was completely gray now, aged by the weight of decisions that affected billions of lives. Turns out they do have stellar manipulation technology. Developed it about the same time we did, for similar reasons. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The pattern had become familiar over the past 5 years. Across the galaxy, dozens of species had developed desperate weapons when faced with extinction. The difference was that humanity had been the first to master the technology completely. "Any signs of hostility?" she asked. "Actually, no. They're requesting a mutual defense pact. Apparently they're dealing with something called the Void Syndicate machines that consume entire solar systems for fuel. They want our help." Sarah turned from the viewport to look at the tactical displays that now dominated her life. Holographic representations of 2 entire galaxies dotted with crisis points that required human intervention. Here, a species-wide civil war that threatened to destabilize an entire sector. There, an ancient artificial intelligence awakening after millions of years and demanding tribute from neighboring civilizations. "How many active situations are we monitoring now?" she asked. 237 major incidents, over. 1,000 minor ones, Harrison replied. "The good news is that most species are learning to solve their own problems. Word has gotten around about what happens to civilizations that create galactic lethal threats. Through the communication system, Sarah could hear the constant chatter of human coordinators managing crises across 2 galaxies, diplomatic teams negotiating peace treaties, scientific expeditions sharing technology with developing civilizations, military fleets positioned to respond to threats before they could escalate. Humanity had become exactly what Dr. Vasquez had predicted: the galaxy's police force. But they'd tried to be good at it. Instead of ruling through fear, they'd built a network of alliances and partnerships. Instead of hoarding their technology, they'd shared it with species that proved they could use it responsibly. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still species that resented human authority, still crises that seemed impossible to solve. But for the first time in galactic history, there was a stabilizing force that could prevent wars before they started. "Director," a young communications officer called from across the command center. "We're receiving a message from Earth. Priority 1. Sarah activated her command console, and President Martinez's familiar face appeared on the screen. The leader of Earth looked tired but determined, surrounded by the bustling activity of the solar system's government center. "Sarah, we've had a breakthrough in the quantum mechanics research. Dr. Patel's team believes they've found a way to create controlled quantum tunnels between galaxies. Not just communication, actual transportation." The implications hit Sarah immediately. If they could build permanent gateways between galaxies, humanity could extend their peacekeeping efforts across the entire local cluster. But it also meant taking responsibility for even more civilizations, more potential conflicts, more impossible decisions. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "First prototype gateway could be operational within 6 months. Full network within 5 years." "But Sarah," President Martinez paused, looking older than his years. "The physics team is detecting quantum resonance signatures from galaxies beyond Andromeda. If their calculations are correct, this technology might reach even further than we thought." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. When she'd first joined the military, her biggest concern had been protecting a single colony world. Now she was helping coordinate the protection of multiple galaxies. "Ma'am?" The communications officer was looking at her expectantly. "Should I transmit a response?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked out at the stars, billions of points of light, each one representing entire solar systems full of life. Somewhere, out there, civilizations were being born, growing, facing challenges that might threaten their existence. And somehow, humanity had become their guardians. "Tell President Martinez we approve the Gateway Project," she said finally, "but with conditions. Full diplomatic preparation before we make contact with any new galaxies. No military intervention unless specifically requested. And we share the technology with our allies from the start." She turned to Admiral Harrison. "James, I need you to prepare a briefing for the Galactic Council. If we're going to extend our reach beyond this local cluster, we need to make sure we're doing it right." Harrison nodded. "I'll also recommend expanding the Peacekeeping Academy. We're going to need a lot more trained personnel if we're planning to stabilize multiple galaxies." The Peacekeeping Academy had been Sarah's idea, a joint training program where humans and allied species learned to work together in crisis situations. It was producing a new generation of leaders who understood that strength wasn't just about superior weapons, but about building trust and cooperation across species lines. "Director Chen," another voice called from the communication array. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Reconstruction Fleet. Admiral Karthik is requesting permission to speak with you directly." Sarah was surprised. The former Zephyrian military leader had been cooperative during the post-war period, but he rarely made personal contact. It him through. The holographic display showed the metallic form of Admiral Karthik, looking exactly as he had during the war. But something in his posture seemed different, less rigid, more ... humble. Director Chen, his mechanical voice carried what might have been respect. "I am contacting you to report completion of the Proxima Centauri Restoration Project. The human colonies destroyed during our invasion have been rebuilt and are now more advanced than they were before the war." "Thank you, Admiral," Sarah replied. "Your people have been thorough in their reparations." "It is not just reparations, Karthik. Said my species has spent centuries believing that military strength was the only path to survival. We destroyed dozens of civilizations because we thought it made us safer. But observing humanity's approach to galactic leadership, we have learned that protection is stronger than conquest." He paused, and Sarah could see other Zephyrian figures. In the background of his transmission, "We would like to formally request inclusion in the Galactic Peacekeeping Initiative. Our military experience, combined with human strategic thinking, could be valuable in maintaining stability." Sarah exchanged glances with Admiral Harrison. The idea of former enemies becoming allies was still surreal, but it had been happening. Across the galaxy, species that had been at war for centuries were learning to work together under humanity's stabilizing influence. "I'll present your request to the Council," Sarah said. "But Admiral, I have to ask why. Your empire was one of the most powerful in the galaxy. You could have rebuilt your military, waited for an opportunity to challenge us again." Karthik's photoreceptors flickered in what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile. "Because we finally understand what humans knew all. A long survival is not about being the strongest. It is about being part of something larger than yourself." After the transmission ended, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had brought them here. A desperate defense of New Geneva had somehow led to humanity becoming the stewards of galactic civilization. Every decision they made now affected the lives of trillions of beings across multiple galaxies. "Sarah," Admiral Harrison said quietly, "do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? All this power, all this responsibility, what if we're making mistakes that won't be visible for centuries?" Sarah considered the question as she watched a human patrol fleet move through the distant stars. Their mission to investigate reports of unusual energy signatures near the galactic core. Each ship carried enough firepower to level entire worlds, but they also carried medical supplies, scientific equipment, and diplomatic staff trained in hundreds of alien cultures. "I think about it every day," she admitted. "But then I remember what the galaxy was like before. It was constant wars, species-wide genocides, civilizations destroying themselves because they had no one to call for help. We're not perfect, but we're trying to do better. She activated her personal communication device, checking the daily reports from across human space. Colony worlds were thriving. Trade routes were secure. Research stations were making breakthrough discoveries that benefited everyone. The academies were producing a new generation of leaders who understood that diversity was strength, not weakness. Besides, she added with a slight smile, what's the alternative? Go back to being a minor species, hoping no one notices us. Pretend we don't have the power to make a difference? Harrison laughed. I don't think the rest of the galaxy would. Let us retire even if we wanted to. Too many species have gotten used to having someone to call when things go wrong. As if summoned by his words, the communication array chimed with an incoming priority message. Sarah activated the display. The face of Ambassador Trelvac appeared, one of the Centaurian diplomats who had become humanity's strongest supporters. Director Chen. The insectoid alien's translated voice carried urgent concern. We have a situation developing in the Magellanic clouds. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. The patterns suggest artificial origin. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Another crisis, another decision that could affect the fate of billions. How massive, she asked. Not comparable to the Aegis platforms, but different. The quantum signatures suggest technology that manipulates dark matter rather than stellar cores. If hostile, it could pose a threat to multiple galaxies. Sarah looked at Admiral Harrison, who was already pulling up tactical displays and fleet deployment options. In the 5 years since the war ended, they'd responded to hundreds of similar alerts. Most turned out to be natural phenomena or misunderstood. Alien technology. But some had been genuine threats that required careful handling. Assemble the rapid response fleet, she ordered. Full diplomatic package, but with heavy escort. And get me a direct line to the Andromeda contact team if this is technology we haven't seen before. Might need their expertise. As the command center burst into activity, Sarah took one last look at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, a new challenge was emerging. Another test of humanity's ability to protect the civilizations that had come to depend on them. But, for the first time since the war ended, she felt ready for whatever came next. Humanity had learned to carry the weight of cosmic responsibility. They'd built alliances that spanned galaxies, created institutions that could survive individual leaders, and developed wisdom to match their power. The little species that had once faced extinction was now the guardian of the galaxy. And perhaps, Sarah thought as she turned back to her duties, that was exactly what the universe needed in the distance. Human ships moved between the stars, carrying hope to civilizations that had learned to trust in humanity's promise that no species would face extinction alone, and that the strong would always protect the weak. The war was over, the peace was just beginning, and humanity was ready for both.